Rubeck, would you be so kind as to suggest a prayer?
Hail Mary,
full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Thank you very much, sir. Yesterday I introduced you to the Rotarian field trip on Thursday, April the 19th. I told you I would pass the list around again today. Again, the Rotarians will provide you with transportation from Helias to the Capitol Plaza and back. The itinerary has been put on the second page. The cost is $5. All I ask is that if you sign up, you not change your mind. Again, if it ain't your cup of tea, pass it up. You late for a reason?
Yes, I have a question.
I can't hear a word you say. After the Battle of Midway, it is the turning point of the war. The Japanese will never be on the offensive again. The Americans will now take the war to Japan. But how exactly are we going to take the war to Japan? That's the question. Well, MacArthur has his plan. MacArthur's plan is relatively simple. The American Army will take over New Guinea. The American Army will then move to the Philippines. The American Army will then move to China. The American Army will then take over Japan. Couldn't be simpler. Well, not so fast, General MacArthur. This is Chester Nimitz. He is in charge of the Navy. And Nimitz has a plan that is remarkably different. Nimitz's plan is to go to islands in the Central Pacific, capture one, build an airfield, bomb all the other islands around it, then everybody back in the ship. Let's go to another island farther away. Let's hop to the next island, take it over, bomb all the islands around it, and keep on doing that until we get to Japan. Now, Nimitz's plan is called island hopping. So, here's a map of the Pacific. Let's let MacArthur be in red. Here's Big Mac in Australia with his army. And now we're going to capture New Guinea because that is the island closest to Australia where the Japanese are. Then we're going to capture the Philippines. And we're going to capture China. And then we're going to capture Japan. Easy peasy. Let's look at the Navy. The Navy will start here in New Guinea as well. They will then capture islands in the Central Pacific. And from these islands, they will eventually capture Japan. Okay, Mr. President, which one do we do? Do we follow MacArthur's plan? Or do we follow Nimitz's plan? Roosevelt votes for both. Roosevelt believes that the Army and the Navy, in competition with each other, will do more to end the war than taking one plan or the other. In 1942, both the United States Army and the United States Navy will begin their plan in the Solomon Islands, in the chain of islands which we call New Guinea. It's time to take the war to the Japanese. Now, we could write in our notes hundreds, maybe thousands of battles. Let's try to keep it down to about 4. Tarawa. Now, why Tarawa? Tarawa is just a tiny speck in the middle of a group of islands in the Central Pacific. Now, it is my belief that some of you will join the United States Marine Corps, either out of high school or out of college, or use the Marine Corps as a way to pay for your college. Now, in Marine Corps basic training, and everybody has to go through basic training, whether you be officer or enlisted man, everybody goes through the same one. The first week is generally referred to as Hell Week. Now, in this week, you will be indoctrinated to what it takes to be a Marine. And in the indoctrination, they will talk to you about Tarawa. Now, in Tarawa, the ships that carry the Marines are coming to the shore, and about 200 yards from the shore, they run aground on the coral reef. They have to open the door. The men have to jump into the water that's chest deep. They have to hold their rifles above their heads so their rifles don't get wet. Guns don't work if they get wet in those days. All the while, they are wading ashore. The enemy is firing at them with rifle and machine gun and mortars and cannons, and Marines are blowing up left and right, yet the Marines continue inshore. The next wave comes, hits the coral reef, drops the boat. The next wave comes marching, wading ashore. Eventually, the Marines take Tarawa. It was extremely bloody, and it was a battle in which the people of the United States see what a real Marine is like. In 1944, the American Army captures the Philippines. Here's Big Mac right here, and he's wading ashore. And as soon as he gets ashore, he gets on Filipino radio, and he says, "Rally round me! Rally round me! I have returned." The Filipino president, which is right there, is going to tell his people to fight the Japanese anywhere, everywhere. And by Christmas of 1944, the Philippines have been recaptured from the Japanese. In 1944, the American Marines will capture Guam. Now, from Guam, a new bomber can be flown. Now, in the Air Force, you'll see a letter. If it's a B, then it's a bomber. If it's an F, then it's a fighter. And the B-29 can fly farther and higher than any other bomber in our inventory. It can fly from Guam to Japan and back. And it can fly high enough that the enemy cannot have fighters that can go up and shoot it down. Let's stop for a second and let's make sure we know what's going on. So here's the Army. It started in 42. They captured New Guinea. They've captured the Philippines. Here's the Navy. They started in the Solomons. They've captured Guam. It is decided in 44 that the Army will bypass China and the Army will go directly to Japan. The Navy will go directly to Japan and take the war to the Japanese. In 1944, the Army Air Force in the Pacific is put under the command of Curtis LeMay. That's the guy chomping on the big O cigar. LeMay is different. LeMay believes that the Japanese should be bombed, yes, but not in the conventional manner. When the Americans flew over the Germans, they dropped what were called dome bombs. A big 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 pound bomb, and when it hit, it blew up, and anything around it got blown up as well. LeMay said that won't work against the Japanese. LeMay said, let's drop a bunch of fire bombs. So when they hit, instead of blowing up, they start a fire. And these fires are very hard to put out because the fire is started by magnesium. And the cities will start on fire. And the Japanese don't have a very good fire department. So the Japanese cities will burn to the ground. Now, the problem with the firebomb is not only are you going to destroy military targets, but you're also going to destroy civilian targets. And civilians are going to die in record numbers. Please understand, in the war against the Germans, we were convinced that the German people were turned by a few evil men. But in the war against the Japanese, we believe that the Japanese race was evil and must be destroyed. Now you might say, well, that sounds kind of racist. No, that's incredibly racist. But that's the attitude the Americans took. If we kill the race, too bad, so sorry. Well, here's the problem. Those planes that the Japanese fighters couldn't get up to, they can. And the American planes are being shot at, and in many cases some of them are damaged to the point where they can't fly all the way back to Guam. And trust me, you don't want to ditch in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So, what about Iwo Jima? Now, Iwo Jima is just a tiny, tiny island halfway between Guam and Tokyo. But it's big enough that bombers could land. It's big enough that fighters could be stationed. In the spring of 1945, American Marines will attack Iwo Jima. Now, Iwo Jima was a tough nut to crack. While attacking Iwo Jima, the iconic picture of World War II was taken. The raising of the American flag on Mount Suribachi. This picture has been reproduced and reproduced and reproduced. It became the Pulitzer Prize winning photo of 1945. It has been commemorated into statues and stamps. It is the picture that most people think of when they think of World War II. Well, why don't we hear about the taking of this picture from the man who took it?
I'll get away from that feeling of grabbing for Mother Earth and that first feeling of, what am I doing here? I was coming up toward the brow of the hill, and I was possibly 200 feet away. And as I came closer, I could see this small flag waving on a very long pole. And it gave me a jolt, and I get it now. That was our time. And I went up, not knowing what kind of a picture I would get. Certainly wouldn't be able to fly going up, because it was already up. As I came closer to the pole, I saw, kneeled on the ground, there were like 3 Marines going around a pole that was on the ground, and one of them had tucked under his arm in that usual triangular fashion to fold the American flag. And I said, "What's doing, fellas?" And they said to me something like, "We're preparing to raise this bigger flag. The colonel down below wants a bigger flag so it can be seen by the troops all over the island. For morale's sake or for." And he said also, he wanted to make damn sure he got that first flag back. And then I estimated where they would be, where the flag would be, how tall is this thing, how much far back I need to get in order to get them in. Bill Janose, the Marine photographer of the movie camera, came across in front and went just to my right and said, "I'm not in your way of my job." And I turned and I said, "No, that's fine. Hey, there it goes, Bill." They had just lifted the pole off the ground, and it was on its way up. I swung my graphic around close up to my face and held it, watching through the finder. See, wait a minute, I could estimate what's the peak of the picture. I wasn't referring to, even in my own mind, first, the importance of first flag, second flag. I wanted a flag going up on Eagle. I wanted that. And I could only hope that it turned out the way that I looked at it through the finder.
It was at Iwo Jima that the Japanese introduced a new weapon, the kamikaze. Now, normally, if you are a pilot of a plane, you gas your plane up, you put on your bomb, you fly over the enemy, you drop the bomb on the enemy, and you fly back. Put in more gas, put on more bombs, repeat, 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 until the enemy or you is shut down. But the kamikaze was different. In the kamikaze, the plane would only be given enough gas to make it to the target. Then the pilot would dive his plane into usually the American ship and make sure that the plane and the bomb hit the ship. The bomb would explode. Of course, the pilot would lose his life, but the ship itself would sustain massive damage. Now, kamikaze attacks sank more American ships than Japanese planes dropping conventional dumb bombs. There was really no way to get out of the kamikaze attack. You could always take your ship and maneuver it left and right, forward and back, so the kamikaze missed, but then again you got a pilot in the plane who could go left and right and up and down to reciprocate. You could put up enough anti-aircraft fire that maybe you could blow the kamikaze out of the air. But even if you winged it, the pilot can still have enough control to dive it into your ship. They were something. In the summer of 1945, both Marines and Army soldiers invaded Okinawa. Now, Okinawa is the southernmost island in the Japanese island chain. The question is, we know the Japanese soldiers are going to fight to the death, but since we are now invading Japan proper, what will the civilians do? Not only did the Japanese soldiers fight to the death, but many Japanese citizens, fearing that their island had been taken over by the Americans, would then hurl themselves off the cliffs and kill themselves so they wouldn't come under the American control. In the year 2000, HBO came out with a film called Band of Brothers. It was a show that followed a paratrooper company that landed in Normandy during D-Day and followed them all the way into Germany. It made a ton of money for HBO. It won numerous Emmys, and so in 2008, HBO said, hey, let's do this again. But they chose the Pacific. Now, to make the film, they chose 3 books that have been written about various stages of the war. And Eugene Sledge had written a book about the Marines landing on Peleliu and the Marines landing on Okinawa. Now, Eugene Sledge was a Marine himself. And so from that came promos, watch the show The Pacific, and we got to hear from Eugene Sledge.
Who are you? I'm Eugene Sledge, sir. The responsibility in playing Eugene Sledge is enormous, to make sure that I live up to the man that he really was.
He wrote a book, which the show is partially based on.
We wanted this to really be based on, real people and real survival situations.
The war in the Pacific was savage, brutal. It was hideously difficult for all of them.
I've never been more scared in my entire life.
And he wasn't scared out here, so either Elvira or dead.
He had that sense of duty and patriotism, where he really wanted to defend his country and be a part of that.
He felt he owed something to his country. All his friends had been drafted or had enlisted and had left.
Gene's very good friend Sidney Phillips had joined the Marine Corps and was leaving. That was partially why Gene was so anxious to go. Sid was at Guadalcanal and wrote letters home to Gene.
I told Sledge in one of my letters from Guadalcanal that he should join nothing, not even the Girl Scouts, not the Boy Scouts or Salvation Army. I said, just stay out of everything and anything.
He decided that the war might end before he could get over there, and so he wanted to join the Marines. He had to ask his parents' permission, and his father said, well, they won't take you, you have a heart murmur. And he said, well, I want to try anyway. His father was a physician, and he said, well, let me check you.
He eventually succeeds in convincing his father, when the heart murmur goes away, to let him enlist. But his father's the one that warns him. His father says, I'm afraid what's going to happen to you on the inside.
The worst thing about treating those combat boys from the Great War wasn't that they had had their flesh torn. It was that they had had their souls torn out.
They shipped out to Peleliu, which was next on the list to be taken out by the Marines. The 1st Marine Division was in the front lines approximately 30 days. He was in combat and under fire the entire time.
For Sledge, Peleliu was his first battle. He realizes 2 seconds into it that war is nothing like he could have imagined.
Eugene Sledge did his job and did what he was told to do. You can't ask for any more than that of any man.
Eugene was fine in combat, but the combat did not interest him. It horrified him.
There's not a day goes by that I don't think about it. And when I do think about it, I try to force myself to think about the good buddies I had and some of the things that we did that were funny. But then you also remember the dead and how many of them there were. And they were just snuffed out. And there's no way you can forget them.
My buddy Eugene seemed to be haunted by the war.
Gene had nightmares for many years after the war.
Eugene Sledge had a very difficult time adjusting to civilian life after the war. He was beset, as were many other veterans, with thoughts about why he had survived when so many others had died.
That's one of the cases of war that not only does a man fight in a war, and if he survives, he's got to live with it the rest of his life.
The Pacific is about the private war that all of those veterans had to fight to save themselves from what they were witnessing and what they were engaged in.
You can't dwell on it. You can't dwell on any of it.
My father would say that one of the worst things about World War II was the complete waste of human life, of human potential, brutalization of the survivors.
It is extraordinary that Eugene Sledge came home as he did and lived as he did.
What you have to do is to try to focus your mind on other things.
The thing that helped him to conquer the nightmares and the terrible experiences that would flash back into his mind was to start thinking about something in biology. He had found his calling. He also found that he enjoyed teaching.
My father saw himself as a simple scientist with a love of the natural world who had endured something unspeakable and wanted to convey that to later times and other people. And the best way to do that would be through simply recording what he had observed.
Eugene Sledge wrote with the old breed at Peleliu and Okinawa, which is arguably the best memoir of combat anywhere.
They were not allowed to keep diaries on the front lines.
You're supposed to write shit down, you know. If the Japs valuable intel, they find it.
So he had a little New Testament, and he wrote on the pages of that, he would make little notes to help him remember what had happened at what particular point. And when he came home from the war, one of the first things he did was sit down and write out a complete outline of his experiences.
Eugene Sledge waited years and years and years and years and years before he could put this down on paper. And he didn't publish it until the 1980s. That's a long time to ponder what he had been.
He wrote it for his family, for us to know what he had been through, to have some sense of his experience in World War II and something we could pass on to our children.
To think that someone you knew and loved and who was so modest and gentle could have gone through something that horrific and had enough presence of mind to be able to write it down in a coherent fashion and not go mad.
Gene felt that writing the book would lay the war to rest for him.
the experience was so incredibly intense that after it was all over with, life was never the same, because the sunrise is always more beautiful to me now than it ever was before I started in the puddle on that Amtrak.
He had a great feeling of serenity. He had already been through the worst that life could throw at him, and he knew that he was able to stand up to it.
In 1944, President Roosevelt was told that a new bomb was being developed, a bomb that would be far more powerful than any other bomb that had ever been built before. Now, Roosevelt would never live to see the bomb tested. But in June of 1944, the bomb was tested and it exceeded all expectations as far as how destructive it could be. Now the question is, do we use the bomb on Japan? Truman went to his advisors, and Marshall told him that if the Americans were forced to invade Japan, the death toll for American soldiers would be 1 million plus. The death toll for Japanese citizens and soldiers would be 10 times that amount. To save lives, Truman ordered the dropping of the atomic bomb. In August of 1945, the Enola Gay will take off from Guam. It is given 5 different targets with the instructions that the target that has the least amount of cloud cover shall receive the bomb. They wanted to make sure that they could follow the bomb from plane to ground. They could see the ground when the bomb went off. Hiroshima, which is a sea-coastal town, drew the short straw. This is a picture that was taken from inside the Enola Gay about a minute after the bomb went off. And you can see that classic mushroom-shaped cloud that is hurling itself into the sky. Days later, this photograph was taken from the ground at Hiroshima. We know that tens of thousands of Hiroshiman citizens will die, literally vaporized by the tremendous heat of the bomb. Now the problem with atomic bombs is when they go off, they don't completely use up all the uranium. That some of the uranium, microscopic size, is hurled into the air and then falls to the ground, and you either ingest it through breathing it, or it gets on your skin and you develop radiation poisoning, which is one of the worst poisons known to man. There is no cure. And hundreds of thousands of Japanese will die of radiation poisoning. 2 days later, another atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, which is farther inland. Again, tens of thousands will die immediately. Over 100,000 will die soon afterward from radiation poisoning. How many more bombs does the United States have? In mid-August of 1945, the Emperor of Japan will go on the radio. He'd never been heard by the people before. And the Emperor explained that there was no defense against these bombs. And Japan would approach the Swiss government for a declaration of surrender. Well, what was it like in that plane when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima? Well, here's the pilot of the plane telling us.
On August the 6th, 1945, two American Super Fortress bombers arrived over the Japanese city of Hiroshima on the world's most devastating military mission. The Enola Gay, with Colonel Paul Tibbets at the controls, was about to drop the first atomic bomb, a weapon conceived by a group of international scientists based at Los Alamos in the United States. So far, no one knew exactly what effect the bomb would have, either on the unsuspecting inhabitants below or on the crew of the plane itself. They were soon to find out.
The bomb went off, the whole inside of the airplane just lit up as if someone had set off a flashbulb. And then we had to wait, and this was our big worry, is what would the blast do when the blast got to the airplane. And finally the blast did arrive. It was like being in an ash can and getting someone kicking. And then we crowded to the window and saw just the whole city completely covered in smoke with this very tall mushroom cloud rising from it.
President Truman had already threatened the Japanese with a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. When the truth was revealed, his words seemed an understatement. Buildings vaporized, so did the clothes on people's backs. Was it a bomb that should never have been dropped? Some people thought so. Others argued that it shortened the war and kept a subsequent peace. One thing was not in doubt. Hiroshima taught mankind the awful truth about nuclear weapons and just what horror they could bestow.
Truman was asked, after the dropping of the atomic bomb, after he had left the presidency, would he do it again? And he said yes. I defy you to find anybody from that generation who would not have dropped the bomb. The bomb saved lives. So says my mother, so says my father who lived through that there. That's the reason why Truman did it. In September of 1945, the battleship Missouri will lead a flotilla of naval vessels into Tokyo Harbor. A delegation of Japanese dignitaries will be ferried onto the Missouri. The surrender papers will be signed. The war is over. VJ Day. Well, this is such a momentous occasion, I'm sure it was in the news.
The U.S. battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay was the setting for the signing of the surrender terms which officially brought the war with Japan to an end. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allies, joined Admirals Nimitz and Halsey and other top commanders aboard the Missouri September 2nd, 1945. The ceremony took place on a Sunday. Foreign Minister Shigemitsu and other representatives of the Japanese nation on the deck of the battleship, even as the world recalled that other Sunday in '41 and the act of treachery which shattered the calm of the Pacific Ocean and the world. Now at last, defeated Japan and the Allies were to sign the surrender terms.
The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you. As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose in the tradition of the countries I represent to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with.
First to sign the surrender document was Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu for Japan's emperor. Articles in the surrender terms included the following. All provisions of the Potsdam Declaration were accepted. All armed forces were surrendered unconditionally. Acknowledgement of authority of the emperor and the Japanese government was subject to the will of the Allied Supreme Commander General Douglas MacArthur, now signing. The first pen became a cherished memento for General Wainwright. The second pen went to Britain's General Percival. In order, the nation signed. General Su Yung Chang for China. For the United Kingdom, Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser. General MacArthur called on the representative of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant General Kuzuma M. Derivianko. Also, the representative of Canada, Colonel Elmore Cosgrove. In all, there were 12 signatures affixed to the surrender document, and then in 20 minutes it was over. Nearly 4 years of bitter conflict had come to this brief ceremony. The war chapter was closed, and a weary world looked hopefully to new horizons of enduring peace.
Well, we've won the war against the Japanese. Yesterday we won the war against... Yesterday we won the war against the Germans. Tomorrow we will see what the war is like on the home front. Again, we will have our quiz next week. It'll either be on Tuesday or Wednesday. I'll tell you for sure tomorrow. I have the bell ringing in about 3 or 4 minutes, so we'll stop here for today.
Test, test.